Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Clark for the Dr. William Clark podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things nonprofit. And I'm glad to be with you today. Today we're going to be talking about how to approach grant writing, and I want to talk about this to help you address the mindset around grant writing and how to kind of move beyond the stuck places of grant writing. I want to share three things with you. Then I also have a bonus idea for you to kind of help you work through this so that we can improve our grant writing approaches, our mental approach to it, and our attitude to it. So let's go ahead and get started and jump into those 3 points now. Number one, you got to think about grant writing as an opportunity to tell the story of your organization and your program. You're in this space to perform a service, a project, to execute a program, to serve a specific targeted community. And your ability to serve that community comes from one, the idea that you have, which is your program concept, your curriculum, your formula, etc. Then it's manifested by way of financial support, right? So you can have an awesome idea, but if there's no financial resources to support the project, to pay for staff, to pay for overhead, and any other programmatic expenses, it's just an idea with no ability to get any traction. So you're telling your story to potential donors with the goal of having them support this project. Now, donors can range from foundations to individual donors to funds from other organizations if you're serving as a subcontractor, to loans, to lines of credit, to public fundraisers or crowdfunding, etc. Wherever you're getting your funding support, you're telling your story to generate financial support. So you got to think about the storytelling process. There are a number of storytelling experts, particularly in the grant writing space, who can walk you through how to tell your story. And then there are other alternative views about how to tell the story, and one of which I'm going to just share a little bit with you in the next point. But as you think about this, you got to put yourself in the mindset of thinking, I know this particular grant application is long. I know there are X number of questions, and it seems daunting to complete this process, particularly since we're up against it from a time perspective. But I would encourage you, as your coach, as your consultant, I would encourage you to approach this with an open mind, with a huge, huge, huge focus on taking this wonderful opportunity to tell the story of your program. Now, the other thing I would tell you, too, about telling your story is that when you're telling your story, you got to think about the fact that you are given the opportunity to communicate to an outside audience what's going on with your organization. You may not have the strongest marketing plan. You may not have the strongest branding plan that's being executed. So if that's the case, which is generally the case for a lot of nonprofits, how do you get your story out? How do you communicate all that's happening within your organization? Well, one way to do that is to engage in the grant writing process, which allows you to tell your story to the outside world. And when you do that, yeah, you're submitting a grant. And yeah, you're pursuing funding opportunities. But here's a little known secret. As others read your story, people begin to share your story, right? So you have the internal workings of a foundation whose job is to evaluate grants, make decisions about funding awards, etc. But then they begin to share with their colleagues within the organization, outside the organization, what you're doing as you begin to perform against the work once you're funded, as you submit your reports, and as you share your key data points. It begins to create this shift within the ecosystem surrounding your organization, where people begin to pay attention and they're listening and they're watching to understand what's happening with this organization. They're new on the scene, or they've been here for a while, but we've never really had the opportunity to engage. So the storytelling process can initiate and ignite quite a bit of action surrounding your organization. The second thing you want to think about when you're trying to approach a grant is to view this as an opportunity to communicate your program's strategic plan. All right? This is an opportunity for you, your organization, to communicate your program's strategic plan. When you look at the meat of most major or serious grant applications, and we're defining major and serious as grant applications tied to serious money. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, $50,000 or above per year. The meat of those questions tend to ask questions that are seeking to understand what's the strategy here? What's the background? What's the vision? And what's the strategy to get this program either off the ground or moving in a different direction because it's mature and you want to raise the bar of performance, right? The centerpiece of those questions is really getting at strategy. If you really think about it, particularly if your organization has recently been through a strategic planning exercise with a consultant, or it is going through that exercise with the consultant, you should probably see some correlation between the exercise and the process of your strategic planning consultant and the process and the questions that are being asked of foundations, particularly with major grant applications. I would encourage you to always take those grant applications really seriously because it really gives your organization an excuse to dust off your strategic plan. A lot of organizations, nonprofits specifically, tend to create strategic plans, spend a whole lot of money and time on it, and then put it on a shelf and don't really touch it or use it or don't measure against it. Which is a huge mistake because that means you just wasted thousands of dollars going through that exercise. I would recommend that you use those strategic plans as a reason to kind of test the assumptions that you've made when you originally were writing the plan and see how it incorporates into a grant application. You might be surprised at how useful the information is. You might be surprised at how forward-thinking you could be in your grant writing process. This is huge. I'm not sure how many grant applications y'all may see outside of your organization, but the ability to see a grant, other grants from other organizations, you might be surprised at how bland and dull and unengaging these applications are, and it's primarily because folks are thinking about grants as these standalone term papers, if you will. It's like a research paper that they're writing, and sometimes the grant writer or the department head or whoever's writing the grant writes the grant independent of the overall organizational strategy. That's a huge, huge, huge mistake. So you're missing out on the ability to use strategic language from your organization within the application. And on the flip side, when you start to combine the writing between your strategic plan and your grant application, you might see opportunities to improve the language and the approach of your strategic plan. And so if you're not looking at your grant writing process as a way to communicate your program strategic plan or your organization strategic plan, you're missing out. So that's something I would encourage you to take a deeper look at. Lastly, how to approach grant writing. We talked about telling your story. We talked about communicating your program's strategic plan. And then lastly, you want to approach grant writing as an opportunity to court investor support. You want to court investor support. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. How can we engage investors in our ecosystem, in our way of thinking, in our culture of approaching problems and solving problems to say, hey, this is fertile ground. This is a worthwhile place to make an investment. This is a great place to say, hey, if you want to see your investment grow and solve major problems in the community, this is an awesome organization to do it at. If you're not approaching grant writing from that viewpoint, you're going to find yourself overthinking every little thing. I have been in situations where clients have rewritten grants that we rewrote because they wanted to add every nook and cranny of the culture within the grant application. And the problem with that is, one, you've paid an expert to do this and you're undoing the work. Number two, probably the bigger problem is you have a limited word or character count. It is impossible, literally impossible, physically impossible to create more real estate within a grant application when funders rightfully so, and I think it's smart to limit the amount of words and characters you're able to use with each question. So when you're looking at the real estate limitations, you're landlocked with your work limits, your character limits. You have to think intentionally and strategically about how to answer each question with the intent of courting the funder to become a financial supporter. Let's go back to the second point, right? Communicating your program's strategic plan. When you think about the strategic plan, right? If your program has one or if your organization has one, it's not like this unending, ever-ending business plan that's going on for hundreds of pages. That's absolutely crazy. There are plans that can be 1 to 2 pages. It can be as long as 7 to 10 pages. But the intent behind it is to have a landlocked document that quickly, succinctly, and efficiently communicates the approach an organization is going to take over the next 24 months to 5 years, right? You can't pontificate on in about this because there are significant visual limitations to what you're able to see, if you want to use the word to be prophetic, into the future, because you just don't know all of the scenarios you're going to be confronting that may derail or propel your organization. So you're always going to be landlocked. So when you're looking at courting investors' support, you have to focus on what do you need to communicate in an efficient and succinct way that's going to garner support. How do you do that? You look at their strategic plan. You look at the language that they're using. You look at how they view the work, and you look at those same things with you. Your strategic plan, your words that you use to communicate the problem, and how do you approach the work, and where's the synergy? Right? This is not about writing words on a paper to please your funder. It's about finding the synergy between both organizations and writing about the middle point. That is the point. Writing about what aligns both organizations. If you want to write on the fringes of a grant or an idea, and the fringe is really the nuances about your organization and the kinks of your organization and the cultural the unique things of your culture. If you want to write about those things on the fringe, you're missing a huge opportunity in the center to engage a funder. It's just, I can't even talk about that enough. You got to focus on the center. Here's the bonus piece. How to approach grant writing. A lot of people only approach grant writing with the goal of getting money. Now, don't get it twisted. That's how I used to approach it as a nonprofit exec. That's how I approach it as a grant writer and fundraising specialist and consultant to my clients. It's all about getting the resources. Without the resources, how can we run our program? But here's a bonus thing to consider when approaching grant writing. There's value in the process, whether you win or not. I have used grant applications as a way to generate thoughts, to generate creativity, to encourage organizations to think differently, to encourage my clients to approach problems differently, to rethink how they execute their programs or how they brand their programs. In some cases, I've used grant applications to help organizations rethink their approach to strategic thinking, strategic planning, etc. As an organizational leader, I'm going to encourage you to view it the same way. Grant writing is always an exercise in testing the foundation of your thoughts and your assumptions. It's an exercise of testing whether or not we have the right plan in place, and if we don't, how can we course correct in the middle of our strategic plan to solve the problem and to be a resource and an asset to our community. Now, if you're interested in learning the basics behind how to fundraise for your nonprofit, the basics behind the approach to fundraising, I'm going to encourage you to visit my website, DrWilliamPClark.com, where you can access and register for our new course, The Basics of Grant Writing and Fundraising for Your Nonprofit. That course was designed specifically for you. We go into detail, hours upon hours, how to approach fundraising, the mentality behind fundraising, how to set your organization up for success when it comes to fundraising, because without these resources, you cannot solve the problems your organization was designed to solve. You cannot help the community you feel connected and called to. So right now, go to DrWilliamPClark.com and click on register for that class, how the basics of fundraising for your nonprofit organization. Until the next time, this is Dr. Clark. See everybody.